let's talk about, for a moment, about imperfections that you'll find in your shellac, in your French polish as you go. Stuff will happen. You'll see a little spot that looks wrong, a pimple of shellac. Your pad will stick to the surface for a second and you'll get an imperfection and you'll yell at yourself if you're me. My wife hears me yelling at me, myself. Lots of stuff can happen. You'll see some general roughness. So, what do? So let's talk about 2 or 3 techniques from perhaps the least aggressive to more aggressive. The first thing you do is recognize that some imperfections will disappear with the next polishing session. If you do something, by the way, don't try to fix it right away with the surface wet. Wait a half an hour at least before you go back and try to fiddle. So the first thing is, I'd say 50% of imperfections in my polish will disappear with the next polishing session, because remember, you're adding alcohol. The alcohol is the solvent. It's going to soften up the top coat and you're adding more polish. So a lot of times you'll see something and just repolishing will fix it. What else? If you see some imperfections and some roughness, that may be a time to hit the surface with pumice. The pumice is absolutely going to abrade that top coat and get rid of a lot of imperfections. The next thing that you can do certainly is use a little bit, a drop or two of alcohol. Again, as the solvent, it's going to soften up whatever the problem spot is, and then you can add more shellac to fix the problem. I guess the next most aggressive thing you do is actually remove the problem. Again, because alcohol is your solvent, to remove a little bit of shellac maybe in the top coat of the previous coat, you can use a drop or two. Be very unaggressive with this technique. Less is more. You don't want to remove everything, unless you really want to remove everything. Use a drop or two of alcohol, rub it in with your circular motion, and that will remove that top layer of polish. Now you can let it dry and repolish. And probably the most aggressive thing, if you really have some kind of problem, is to say, I've got to remove the polish completely from that section. And you can do that with the alcohol, remove the polish. You can also sand it. So those would be the typical ways that you can fix a problem. I typically would go, unless I'm sure that I got a real problem, with the least aggressive and go up, because a lot of times, believe me, you'll find just adding more polish in your next polishing session starts to solve whatever looked bad to your eye. The other thing that I would do in between polishing sessions is not just look at it. I mean, you should be eyeballing your piece from all kinds of angles with good light, but you should also be feeling it, because you're going to feel imperfections your eye may not pick up. So, use your fingers. I don't know if I mentioned it before, but before I start polishing, my whole 5-day process, I clip my fingernails really thoroughly. There is nothing worse, and I have done this several times, than to be rubbing hard, putting a lot of pressure on your polish, and you clip it with a fingernail. And now you've got a real scratch, and that's something you're going to have to fix with one of the techniques that I just mentioned. So, clip your fingernails well. Some people like to use sandpaper in between rather than pumice in between coatings. I don't, but I have nothing against it. I just like the pumice idea. If you're going to do it, wet dry sandpaper is the way, and it should be a very, very light sanding. You are not trying to do much other than to take any general imperfections off. Sometimes I'll get a little pimple of polish, and I may feel that I can sand it off. I may even take a sharp scraper blade and scrape it off, but they can be annoying. Let me talk about one more thing when it comes to fixing problems. You also have to know your level of skill and your level of, should I call it, analness. There's stuff that will happen that I can't fix, or at least in my level of skill, I cannot fix it. Sometimes I'll get a tiny pinprick in the finish, literally the size of a pinprick, that I cannot seem to get to fill completely. Or some other little imperfection that at first I think, oh, that no problem, but then it doesn't fill, or it doesn't fix in the way that I'm hoping. So you also have to know yourself, not only know the techniques of repair as we just talked about, but deal with what can you live with? Or if you're building this for a customer, what can your customer live with? So it's something to consider, because you can go crazy. You can sand the finish off and go down to bare wood and try to fix something, but you really have to know yourself. How much is this going to bug me? How bad is it? How much is it going to bother me? Or is it a little nothing that I'm never going to see again once and nobody else is? So something to think about. Shellac fools me. I'll have problems in the finish or even in the bare woodwork that I think there's no way this is going to go away. And the shellac will fill it and make it either flat out disappear, or at least be a lot less noticeable. There's other times I'll have a little nothing that I'm positive is going to fill in and go away that never goes away and I can't get rid of. So I'm still learning, and the shellac will fool me. There are things on this guitar that will fill in through shellac. Part of that is also about color. Do you have dark wood? Are you using a darker shellac? You'll tend to be able to cover up a lot more sins. If you have a very light wood, like the top of a guitar, which is spruce, and you're shellacking it with very light colors, blonde or platina, you may be less likely to cover or fill up imperfections. So it'll fool you. There's times when you'll go, I'm positive this is going to stand out like a sore thumb, and the shellac will fill it in. So enjoy experimenting with that. There's significant differences, I'm sure you all know, between hardwood and softwood. So in guitar making, we're using both usually. We've got the back and sides, which in this case are myrtle wood, and the top, which is spruce. Usually the problems in the hardwood are bits of tear out. I don't have a lot of sanding scratch issues to fill here, but there are little tiny bits of tear out that I want to look at the guitar carefully and focus on trying to fill with the shellac. On the other hand, as we'll see later when I look at the top will tend to have show sanding scratches more in the soft wood of the top. And so a lot of my effort ends up being trying to make sure that the sanding scratches get filled. I think I said at the beginning, sanding is one of my things I'm not great at. And so there are sanding scratches on the top of the guitar that we're going to hope will fill as we continue. But on the back and the sides, not so much.